Hello and welcome to this, the latest in our series of webinars on risk management and other insurance matters. My name is Ed Dorrell and I'm Features and Comment Editor here at the Times Educational Supplement. Today I'm delighted to have with us Paul Toombs, who's Head of Education at Zurich Municipal. We will be talking about outdoor learning and other school visits. First things first, Paul, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about why you think school visits are so important.
Thank you, Ed. Well, outdoor learning broadens students' horizons and actually it really does help in terms of giving them a broader education. If you think back to when you were at school, you think back about your friends and your teachers and the buildings themselves, but actually some of those most vivid memories are when you actually exchanged your classroom learning for the opportunity to go out and learn outside of the classroom. And I can certainly remember back to some of those situations myself. So outdoor learning can be a truly valuable and memorable experience.
I know from my professional capacity as a journalist here at the TES that a lot of teachers worry about red tape. There's a lot of perception issues with red tape and school visits. Teachers will often talk at length about filling in endless forms before they can go on any school visits. What do you make of this perception?
Well, we certainly hear stories in the media about schools that have concerns over health and safety, fear of litigation or insurance issues that actually prevent them from going on school trips. This really shouldn't stop school trips from happening. Our view really is that schools should understand the level of risk associated with the school trips and then put in appropriate safety measures for those trips. And if you take, for example, a higher risk activity such as maybe canoeing, caving or rock climbing, well, they're actually going to need to have a much more detailed level of planning and assessment compared to lower risk trips such as maybe a visit to a local library or a museum. But just because some activities are more risky certainly means that they should not be stopped. Safety measures really are a way in which you can ensure these activities are done securely rather than actually stopping them from happening in the first place.
So it should be seen almost as a facilitator to events.
Yeah, just a way of being able to think in advance and really just to put the appropriate level of safety measures in place.
Fantastic. What happens when outdoor learning moves overseas, so school visits abroad?
There's certainly additional considerations when school trips or outdoor learning does move abroad. Things like care for the students on a 24/7 basis, the fact that they're going to be away from home for a longer length of time, and there's possible different sort of legislative and legal issues in the individual countries that you maybe go and visit. And it's also really important to consider the sort of seasonal aspects of that as well. So if you think about an example of maybe a ski trip to Germany during the winter, then you may need to consider putting on winter tyres onto the minibus to be able to drive over there. But really it's thinking about these aspects in advance and again putting the proper sort of safety measures in place before you go.
That's very interesting. One of the issues I think that our readers would like to explore would be the relationship between teachers and school management with regard to where responsibility lies. I think teachers worry a lot about this.
I mean, ultimately the responsibility lies with the school management. The school management should come up with an educational visits policy. It should implement that and it should ensure that all of the visits comply with that policy. And the school should also have a named individual that actually signs off any of the school visits. And then they can decide what the appropriate risk assessment activities that need to happen in advance of the activity.
Sure, absolutely. And what about parents and helpers? You were talking about remembering trips from our youth. I remember very well that loads of mums and dads would come along to help with ferrying kids on and off trains and stuff like that.
Well, I think that the school needs to consider the level of support that they need from parents and helpers. They need to think about those parents being competent for the activities they want them to perform. And they also need to then think about the sort of level and frequency of support that they get from those parents in terms of things like vetting, but also whether they're actually going to have supervised or unsupervised access to the children. I think looking at all of those together, they can then decide the appropriate sort of steps they need to put in place to ensure that they've got the right level of checks and vetting with those parents.
Talking of parents, how can teachers instill confidence in parents about outdoor learning trips and school trips?
And that's important. I think the school needs to have a sort of robust structure around educational visits. I touched on briefly that they need to have a policy in place. I think that gives the parents some confidence. I think having a named individual that's responsible for checking and signing off trips is also important as part of that. I think the level of sort of risk assessment that's done is again important, but it's got to be sensible. And it's got to be proportionate. I mean, they're the key things here. I think each activity should be looked at on its own merits.
And without being overly negative or fearful, how bad can things be financially when things do go wrong?
I mean, ultimately, if things are not planned in advance and are managed poorly, then the financial aspects can be quite significant. If a school has failed to plan in advance and there's a major incident on a school trip, that can have a vicious negative spiralling effect from that. The reputation of the school can be damaged. From that, the disruption of teaching and learning can be quite significant. That can then impact on the overall exam results of the school. That again damages the reputation. It reduces the amount of students coming in future years and potentially their future income. So it can be quite significant. I suppose in terms of protection, schools should think about planning in advance, and they should make sure that they've got general liability and school sort of trip insurance in place with a reputable insurer in advance of going ahead with any school trips.
So what they're the sort of benefits of insurance. What would you think about when you're shopping around for said insurance?
The key aspect is value for money. The schools have got to look at the type and level of cover that they want. They then need to look at the service they want their insurance provider to give, including claims service and any other additional information that provider can provide. And then what they need to do is look at the value for money of that and compare that value and that service against the cost of the insurance.
This is quite common sense, really.
Yes, I'd say so.
Great. Well, I think that's just about everything that we've got time for. Paul has kindly agreed that he'll be on our forums for the next couple of weeks, answering any other questions you might have. That's tes.co.uk/Zurich. All that remains is for me to thank Paul for coming in. Thank you.
Thank you.
And to say goodbye.
Goodbye.